recording. Session is being recorded. Very nice. Very nice. Great.
Yeah, it's a sign. Yeah.
All right, where are we?
Just pop on super quick to twist out the camera, make sure it's angled correctly.
Yeah.
So listen, you guys, as far as that's really quick, I'll re-announce it. We'll have a sign-in sheet. As far as two-page essays are concerned, bring them up at the end. All right. If you're not done, make sure you get it done. It's like I got some emails this morning about people that are not done. They were wondering, like, yes, send it in today, but bring a hard copy on Tuesday, and then there'll be a Blackboard link to upload them. You know, for,
Yeah. Oh, this is a button.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I just use video. If you want to mess with it. I got one in the back. Let's all get in the center because that's where the camera is.
Okay, I understand what's all in the back.
Yep. Looks like I lost the video there.
On video. Can you hear us okay? Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay.
All right, 1, 2, test. We're excited to have you here, Keith.
Oh,
Yeah.
good to meet you again. Yeah,
You excited?
absolutely.
Good.
Very enjoyable. Love talking to students.
Well, we like talking to you, Keith. I assume, I don't know about everybody else, but I'm excited.
We good?
I don't
Are you happy, Edward?
Well,
Steve, by the way, this is Ed Evans. He teaches public relations here. He teaches a course in you're currently teaching a course in
Yes.
public relations.
There will be one Edward now.
the
Very nice.
It's like, if you can't get it, don't worry, I can download
Edward that.
it. If I need it, I'll just use the video down.
okay, as long as you are confident.
Oh, I am. It's like, as long as it's being recorded. Are we being recorded?
Yes.
So it's all good
So the
stuff.
Chinese can steal our information.
There should be an attendance sheet floating around. Please sign it. Or face my rat.
I can take you on.
We're on, okay, so we're still, we still need to get the publicity and advertising vis-a-vis the end of John Berger's book. You know, but a lot of you are cognizant of the different strategies of advertising and public relations. We are honored to have the respected and feared by some. Is Martha Stewart really afraid of you? She said you were mean, and then you're.
She said I was mean, but yeah, we're kind of friendly. Maybe we're frenemies. I don't know. She's always been good copy. I'll tell you that. So.
Well, you know, it's always like it seems like I remember doing the IBM documentary I was working on and talking to an epidemiologist, Dr. Richard Clapp, who had just retired, and he felt just a lot more free. I mean, he was a lot more formidable in his retirement, because then it was like he didn't care what they thought. They didn't care what they thought anymore. You know, But journalist Keith Kelly is with us today. Keith was the media columnist for the New York Post for over 23 years. And the Post is a paper with the 4th highest circulation in the country, last I checked. His pen and I were primarily cast on where they should be, on the halls of power in the Manhattan media food chain. And they say that your Rolodex was something to behold. Usually you had the ear of kings. You had the ear of king, or whatever, right? CEO.
Yeah.
On his retirement, the New York Times wrote that his Media Inc. column was a must-read for the doings and misdoings of New York magazine industry. Welcome, Keith. Keith's son, Eamon, was a former student of mine. Is Keith going into media? Yeah, Keith is going into media, right? Hey, Keith,
his older brother just graduated from the Fire Academy, and I think he might want to follow in those footsteps. But we'll see. I told him get a college degree and then figure it out. Yeah.
Right, which is basically what you did. But first, I want to foreground something here. First, I want to wish you a happy St. Patty's Day, knowing your heritage. And I want to talk about a little bit about what your first real big break was, and where you went. Because I'm always like, encouraging students to go.
My first job, right out of SUNY Oneonta, was I was working as a bartender, a paint salesman at Sears, I was a laborer for a bricklayer, and I was doing a little security work for IBI. So I was working about 60 hours a week, just because I could. Some of the jobs I liked. Bartending was better on the busy days. I liked being a laborer with a bricklayer because that was kind of a family business. Not that my family was in it anymore, but we had a tradition. But I always knew I wanted to get into journalism, but maybe similar to what's going on now, we were in the mid-70s recession, and publishing was constricting and whatnot. Really, I started doing a lot of interviews in the city, getting nowhere. My first big break came. I wrote a very good cover letter to the woman who was an editor of my hometown weekly newspaper called the Smithtown News, because I didn't have a journalism degree, so I was competing against like the Syracuse crowd, and at that stage there wasn't any real journalism major anywhere in the SUNY system. I think Albany had a minor. Oneonta was putting together a minor, so I had to basically talk my way into the first job. She really liked the letter. I worked on the school paper at Oneonta, not as hard as I should have. In retrospect, I would have recommended doing a lot more. I was behind in a few credits, so I turned down a chance to be the sports editor my senior year. That was stupid. If I had to rewrite history, I would have taken the sports editor job just because it looks better on a resume. And you think that you're really busy if you're taking 18 credits, but reality is once you get out into the real world, you'll find out those 18 hours of class time, you really had a lot more time to do constructive work. You just had to budget your time better. So that's what I would have learned in part. Budget your time, do a lot of extracurricular stuff, the stuff that looks good on your resume, follow your passion. My first job, I was getting paid $150 a week, so I wasn't looking for the big bucks, but I was doing something that I believed in and I enjoyed the hell out of it. That was it. So, and now my ambition now at the end of my career, I'm trying to buy another weekly paper. So I'm coming full circle after working for a couple.
Yeah, I want to talk about that too. I definitely want to talk about that. So you weren't necessarily a late bloomer, but you weren't like this internet whiz kid that came out of the gate,
Yeah, well, it was
publishing.
no internet when I started. And in fact, throughout my career, there was a time like even in the early 90s where if you had a story, they would hold it for the print edition and then put it online because they didn't want to ruin the paper, you know. And then by the end of my career, I was aggravated if they didn't get the stuff posted immediately. Just put it online. And even if it was too long for the print version, which I think the columns usually ran 20, 22 inches, which was kind of an old school technology, but I wanted it online because it was faster and it had bigger impact. And you put it online, it's international, instantly international. So you guys who, if you're interested in media careers, the smallest paper today has the same relevance online as the biggest papers. Um, Somebody could be talking to a famous person, could be talking to a student journalist, and sometimes they're more disarmed and honest talking to a journalism student than they might be if they were given a press conference in New York City or Washington D.C. So you can break news, and
Playing field has leveled.
yeah, the internet, to some extent, it made your job harder because I said, like in the old days, if I had a scoop, 24 hours, I was the king. Everybody was trying to catch up. Now, if I have a story that's out there first, it's out there first. Yeah.
People keep on talking about the 24. People keep on talking about the 24-hour news cycle, and that's just like extinct.
Well, yes and no. I mean, stuff that makes the front page of the papers usually plays on the evening news. The evening news is real good at reading the newspapers and reporting what we've already reported. They're also really good at capturing live events, like the shelling in Ukraine at the maternity hospital yesterday. They had live footage. So a print publication is going to be, behind the eight ball on that. It's all on the front pages today of the newspapers of a pregnant woman being carried in a stretcher outside of the hospital in Ukraine.
Right.
So
Daily News, the Post, all of them are
digital
talking about.
Yeah, CNN and Fox will all have that up immediately. So they're good at covering live events. I think the old style legacy media is better at analyzing stuff and putting things in perspective. So, but there's still something of a 24-hour news cycle. Like what the paper's reporting first today, oftentimes will be on evening, 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news shows at night and CNN around the clock.
Really quick, Keith, I want to talk about, I was just reading this morning, and I didn't know that your first big scoop was you went to Belfast, right?
I did. I don't know if I would have. That's Time said it was my first big scoop. I guess it was on the international front. It was good. After the Smithtown News, I started working for McGraw-Hill because I wanted to get into the big city. But they were a business-to-business publisher, trade magazines, and I found it extremely, while slightly more lucrative. And I was in the city. It was extremely boring. I had a nice lofty title of assistant editor at McGraw-Hill, but the magazine was Electrical Wholesaling Magazine. Now, it was a good magazine for what it set out to do. It just wasn't in my career path. But I took the job anyway. And I then just resigned to go to Belfast in early 1980. And towards the end of 1980.
That was huge.
What's that?
What prompted that? Because that was, I mean, things were.
Before doing the job, I was single. I was the events in Northern Ireland were heating up. I had an Irish background. My parents weren't from Ireland, so it wasn't, going back to defend the homeland like Ukrainians might be.
Right.
I was many, many, many generations into the Irish diaspora, but always had a feel for it. I was fascinated by the topic. Read Pete Hamill religiously. He was a columnist at New York Daily News at the time. And I just thought, give it a shot. So I went over there. I did not actually make much money over there, but one of the scoops was one of the prisoners I was there 6 months and came back, and the first prisoner in one of the big got released, came to the United States, started going on with some, problems inside the prisons. I said, well, we've already done that blanket protest story before. Anything else going on? And he said, I'll give you a scoop. There's going to be a mass hunger strike in Long Kesh prison in the near future. I'm like, well, that sounds like a pretty good story. So I went with that as my lead. I was on a wire service. I got maybe $50 for it, but it ran in front of the Catholic newspaper in Chicago, jailed North Irish to use hunger. A lot of people saw it. I started getting calls from British consulate and the Irish, like rebel groups over here. And it didn't really pay off financially per se until 1997. I was going for a job with, now Peter Hamill is the editor of the Daily News, and he sees that in my clip file, and he knew that was a coup. So, but that was 17 years later. So, but that was a good
Right,
coup.
so, I mean, it's interesting how that kind of
You
material,
never know.
people think, you never know.
My theory was I knew that the situation in Belfast was explosive, absolutely explosive, and it did lead to the IRA hunger strike and the riots in the streets and the protests here in New York, Chicago. And my theory was that in many situations, whether it's Afghanistan or Ukraine, the people on the ground know better than the talking heads and better than the governments when a situation is going to explode. I spent less than a year in Belfast, and I knew it was explosive, and I knew something bad was going to happen. My youngest son now is a couple of years out of college. He's a lieutenant in the Marines, stationed up out of a reserve unit in Syracuse, and he supervises a couple of kids who were, not kids, men who were in Afghanistan. And he said the situation, when that deteriorated, any Lance Corporal on the street who spent any time could have told you that when the United States pulled out, the Afghanistan government and army was going to collapse. The people on the street and on the ground knew better. Now, the United States government had all these long ideas that, oh, we'll have some time. And he said, any Lance Corporal that spent any time could have told you that. And it's similar to my
I mean, that was like last semester in my mass media research course, we had filmmaker Corey Rowe, who had been in the, what was it, the 101st Airborne Battalion, Ed, who had said he made a documentary on young vets with PTSD coming out of Afghanistan, and he concurred that they knew, it's like they always.
In Vietnam, which happened in my lifetime, it took a couple of years for the whole thing to collapse. And I guess maybe the United States was hopefully thinking that might be the case in Afghanistan, but it was going to collapse. It was going to collapse in Vietnam. It was going to collapse in Afghanistan. Empire building is not a good idea. Never worked for the British, and it hasn't worked for us either. So
I just want to bring it back really. I want to bring it back really quick to the fact that the younger students here might not really know the import of the whole IRA Belfast struggle and the Bobby Sands situation.
I know.
It's like, yeah, some do.
I could do a whole
live through it. It was a big deal. It was huge.
Bobby Sands, and I personally think it was a pivotal moment because Bobby Sands started the hunger strike. He was the prison negotiator for the first hunger strike in late 1980 that I had foretold. They called it off at the last minute because they thought the British had agreed to let them wear prison uniforms and whatnot. And it turns out what they were doing was, they said, well, we're not going to wear, civilian uniforms. So they said, well, they're going to be civilian-like uniforms issued by the prison authorities. They said, well, then that's not a civilian uniform. It's not a POW thing. It's basically another version of a prison uniform. So Bobby Sands had been the negotiator. I think there were, by the end, 50 people on hunger strike, and they kept going on one by one. And there was a priest who was going in to hear confessions, and he kept smuggling the documents back and forth because the British said we don't negotiate with terrorists, so they had to get a clandestine channel. Anyway, they thought they had an agreement. A few months went by, and they realized that in the IRA's version of events that they had reneged on the agreement and was still issuing prison uniforms. So they said, Bobby Sands said, well, I signed off on it. I'm going to have to start the hunger strike. The IRA on the outside did not want him to do it because they said it was fraught with peril. It put the families through hell, and the odds are we're not going to win, and Maggie Thatcher's not going to give in. So they were not against it, which is why I, as a freelancer, got the scoop, because he was the prisoner giving it to a sympathetic reporter. It wasn't coming out from, one side or the other's major propaganda machine. It was like a one-on-one connection. So Bobby Sands started the hunger strike in March rather, and by April he was nearing the end. And suddenly a parliamentary seat opened up in Fermanagh, South Tyrone, and they decided they would run Bobby Sands for a seat in Parliament, which is like being elected a United States senator. Now the British had said all along that was only a minority supported the armed struggle, and most people wanted peace, and they didn't believe in the IRA thing. Now suddenly they got this guy on an IRA hunger strike, and he's elected to Parliament. So it sort of shatters two things. One, that he had no popular support because he just won an election against the loyalists, and two, that that they were only interested in bank robberies and drug running. I mean, this man was in a peaceful, nonviolent protest, a fast until death, and so stories started coming about, and they didn't put a mass hunger strike in. They had one at a time was joining, like about every week. And so I remember a big front page story in cover story in Newsweek. Why are Irish men standing on line to die? And it resonated like in places like India, where they remembered Gandhi and his hunger strikes, and Europe had a big radical terrorists, but they were saying this one is a nonviolent protest, and it totally galvanized the will of the world against thing. And also the IRA used to said they would never run Sands for election in the British Parliament because they didn't believe it had the right to exist. Now they were getting elected to the British Parliament. So it totally transformed it. They came up with the theory, the Armalite in one hand and a ballot in the other. And today, on the island of Ireland, in the north and the south, the Sinn Féin party is the single biggest party in Ireland. They have more parties than we do, two-party system, but it is the single biggest party. And that's an outgrowth of the whole nonviolent IRA hunger strike. It totally transformed Irish politics to this day.
You never know you never knew. I mean, nothing's really changed.
It hasn't resulted in a united Ireland yet, but the deal for the minority Republican population in the north, they're a heck of a lot better off now than they were when I was there in 1980, when you still had, bombs going off, and you could, see people getting shot, and there were checkpoints. You had British Army tanks on every street corner. IRA was setting up ambushes periodically and slipping away. So now their kids are taking karate lessons, and they still have a higher unemployment rate in the minority Irish Republican population, which tends to be largely Catholic, but their situation is vastly improved. The IRA guys now are like my age. They're white-haired guys.
Right, yeah, right.
The kids today, their kids and grandkids, they're not interested in the armed struggle again. They don't want to go backward. So they've made progress. I don't know if where it will all end. The Irish Republic stayed in the European Union. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, so they pulled out. That's creating a whole other problem, because now they can't trade freely across the border. But who knows? Who knows where that's going to end?
Right.
People in Northern Ireland had actually voted to stay in, but then when they realized Ireland was in and the rest of the United Kingdom was out, the loyalist mob started saying, "No, we can't stay in because we don't want to be linked up with Ireland. We want to be linked up with the United Kingdom." So they still had the majority. Now it's a problem again. So I don't know. I don't know how they're gonna finally resolve it.
Yeah, right. It's like one thing that seems to have stayed the same since those. I mean, a lot of things have changed. I want to talk about that, but you never really know what's gonna like be the tip. What tidbit, what image, what story is going to be the tipping point of something turning into like, an international story. Kind of like the Burning Man picture that started the whole Arab Spring or George Floyd. You never know what piece is going to
Yeah.
start the ground.
Yeah. No, there's, there's like a description of the news business where like, okay, it's the week before Labor Day and we're experiencing a lull, as David Letterman used to call it when one or two of his jokes in, we're experiencing a lull. And it used to be like a slow news week, and you would try to get your feature stories. Okay, I've been putting this one on the back burner. I'll get it in right before at the end of. Now it seems there is no lull. I've had stories like even this Ron Tarosian PR story about the shady PR guy. I had been working on that for a couple of years in between doing my column, and I always figured, okay, it's going to take a lot of effort, but we'll get it in on a slow week. It never happened. There was no slow week. Nobody had enough time to devote to an investigative story until, finally it ran when he was out of when I, after I'd left the paper, we finally got it one story in the Post, and then Cranes did all the follow up in Crane's New York Business. So it definitely made an impact, but there was no slow time. There was no time to sort of sneak it in.
Right, and I want to get back to like the overall implications of breaking that, not only breaking that story, but that kind of practice. All right, but just keeping it topical at this point, it's like so the whole situation of going out to Belfast at that time, there was no CNN, there was no embedded. We didn't really have the sense of like embedded journalists that we had in the Iraq War. So a lot of it's changed. I'm sure you've been following the situation.
They had been better journalists in World War II. Ernie Pyle was probably the most famous one, but they had guys going on the beach in Normandy. Not a lot of them, but they had people that did do it. Then I don't know, the Iraq War they had it again, and then for a while they didn't like embedding them, and there were problems, but most of the time the embeds can tell you better what's going on than
Right. I mean, one could almost make a case that Matthew Brady was like embedded in the Civil War. It's just what we call it. It's always been.
Yeah.
As far as the coverage, the international coverage of the Ukraine invasion and the way that things are being covered, what's good about it and what's bad? Because we can like talk about hypocrisy all day long. What would you do different?
The New York Times had an extremely interesting story the other day that said a lot of the relatives in Ukraine, they have relatives in Russia. They speak the same language, a lot of them. And when they would talk to, like, they had a couple of not kids, younger adults talking to their older parents or grandparents in Russia. And the Russians flat out rejected their idea of what was happening. The Russians propaganda machine had convinced a lot of the Russians that Ukraine had been taken over by neo-Nazis, that the civilian targets were the work of the Ukrainian defense forces. So that's bad. I don't know how many people actually believe it. I was talking to one Ukrainian American who's is a principal of a Ukrainian high school in New York City, and he said he thinks 50% of the people have been persuaded by Russian propaganda, and Russia and China were saying it's U.S. propaganda that there are not. So what's good is you have people there. CNN is there. Fox is there. Like they can just broadcast what's happening. The New York Times was photographing when a Russian shell landed and killed a mother and her two kids who were civilians who were trying to flee the bombing. That's good. I think reality Putin has seriously miscalculated the effectiveness of his own army. It's still superior and will probably eventually subdue the country. But at the other hand, it's going to then move into an insurrection stage. And it's going to be similar to, I think, what the IRA did. All they have to do is not lose. They don't have to win. They just have to not lose once it gets to that point. The Russian advance has been slower. They said the Russian army infantry is afraid to go away from the protection of the tanks and the armored vehicles, and that's allowing civilians to get close and fire anti-tank weapons at the tanks and disable them. And they're very effective at that. So I think we're getting a much more real-time feel. I think it's good. Downside, I don't know. I haven't seen a downside yet. Perhaps that we underestimated a little bit Putin's viciousness. We probably did not think he would attack civilian targets as randomly as he seems to be doing. But the United States government actually pretty accurately called it. They said an invasion was imminent, and it was. And real-time stuff from the field, I think, is great. What's a little bit tougher now is Russia seems to be shutting down a lot of the neutral journalistic sites in its own country. I presume that's going to constrict Associated Press and CNN's ability to get stuff from Moscow. So that's a downside. But I think the free press basically is doing its job.
Right. But even now, I mean, now in like the age of social media and Twitter and stuff like that, it seems like you've got like all the citizen journalism that offsets like whatever the Kremlin wants to do. And yeah, I don't know historically.
Kremlin is shutting down Facebook and Twitter and things like that, so they're denying access. So it's going to be harder for them to reach out, but there's still ways they can reach out. I mean, they still have, their version of WhatsApp, and they can communicate, encrypted, and there's still things that they can see. Russians are telling them it's all propaganda, that stuff is not really happening. They're trying to say that Zelensky left the country when he was speaking in front of the parliamentarian building. They said, oh, that was photoshopped. He's really somewhere else. But it's still going to have to be a period of time. I think while working against the Russians, the Ukrainians say that, I don't know, 40 aircraft have been shot down, and I don't know how many various tanks, 343 tanks have been disabled. I forget how many people they say have been killed or captured. Those people are going to start having an impact on Russian society, I think. So the longer the war wears on, the harder it's going to be for Putin to maintain the charade, I think.
Right. Want to move on to what your primary beat was for most of your career, and media. But really, but you concentrated on what we feel now with media conglomeration and media
I covered a lot of the legacy media companies, the newspaper giants. 60 Minutes had a nice segment about 2 weeks ago on how the hedge funds have moved in and are starting to take over newspapers, and it's terrible because they'll cut staff. They'll sell off the buildings. A lot of times the buildings are worth more than the actual newspapers these days. Heath Freeman, he's been called a vulture capitalist and a destroyer of local newspapers, but that hasn't stopped him from buying the Denver Post, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Daily News, and they highlighted one particular newspaper in Pennsylvania. It used to have, it actually is a small paper in a small town, but it's created two Pulitzer Prizes. Now it's down to one reporter editor doing, the work of what was once done by dozens. And what's suffering is local coverage of local events. Yeah, I can tell you in my own little neighborhood in Manhattan, we once had a very thriving weekly paper, maybe 5 to 10,000 circulation. Now it's down to maybe 300. The owner found out that he could lay everybody off, have one person laying out 4 pages, hasn't posted anything on his website since COVID started, and it's not covering local news.
Right, yeah, and the Village Voice has been gone for how long?
They're coming back with a new owner, but I don't know what his deal is. I think he's putting out monthly issues, but the days of where they could rely on massive, they used to run a lot of classified advertising, and they used to, then they got taken over by somebody who was using it for like adult hookup sites, and they were accusing him of exploiting, sexploitation, trafficking underage women, and I'm not sure what finally happened. They finally split the company up and stopped running the X-rated ads in the Village Voice, even though they were very lucrative. And once they did that, the Village Voice was no longer profitable because a lot of the other classified ads had disappeared. There was no more apartment ads; they were on Craigslist. There was no more help wanted ads; they were on various career job boards. So the reasons that they were profitable disappeared. So I think the other guys who were still running the X-rated sites, they were facing all kinds of legal charges and arrests. I don't know what the disposition of the cases were, but they were basically claiming that they knowingly ran these sex ads, knowing who was behind them, or so they're somewhat culpable in that whole sexploitation industry. So
We want to go out there. We want to go back
now
that road.
the Voice is running a lot of the old archive stuff, which is good. You had Norman Mailer and great writers, Hunter Thompson, legendary names, and there's a certain degree of, okay, I'll look at the old website stuff and the archives and pay a little bit for it. So he's managed to digitize everything and make some little bit of money, but I don't think it's not made the comeback yet, although it does appear monthly again. I don't know. We'll see.
Right. I mean, then it's like I remember being in the Village in the '80s, and it just seems like it's like what it used to really sink its teeth into was like, the social milieu there, the clubs, the art, the artists, the gallery, all that stuff is like, it doesn't.
Totally. The coverage area was excellent. The education system, why is it so poor? Being operated so poorly. The arts, the culture scene, and the political shenanigans. They were watchdogs. I remember one year, must have been maybe late '90s, might have been 2000. They were the only newspaper in New York to win a Pulitzer Prize. So the New York Times didn't win one. The Post, well, they never won, but Daily News, Wall Street Journal, nobody won. Only the Village Voice. Amazing. Then a really good ex-editor from Newsday was running it at the time, and Don Forst, who subsequently passed away up in Albany not too many years ago. But they were excellent. But they could do excellent reporting because they had the ad support. So once the ad support left, they had to cut back editorial. Once they cut back editorial, the readership went down. So it's a downward spiral, unfortunately.
Symptomatic of what
they didn't make a good transition to digital, but even publications that do, you look at the papers that are making money on digital. It's like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. USA Today is national, but they can't make money on digital either, as far as we can tell. Because the problem with, I would ask you guys, do you guys remember any digital ads that you've seen? Most of the time you find that X as quickly as you possibly can, and the digital ad doesn't make the same impression on you as, if you're watching TV and you get a 30-second spot, or if you turn on the page of a magazine or a newspaper and you have to see the page. So
full page.
The ad agencies knows you guys don't pay attention to the ads. So where they might have paid $1 for the ad in in a print publication, they'll pay 10 cents for the ad in a digital publication. So the digital thing has to have 10 times more audience to be able to charge a similar price. And the advertisers don't pay a lot because they know the ads are not as effective. They're good if you say, oh, I want to buy something. I want to buy, you know, I want a price comparison and some, you know, audio equipment or even a car or something. And you can do that. I want to go on Carvana. I want to see what CarMax and Carvana and, you know, compare the prices. It's good for that transactional stuff. It's not good for the old-fashioned branding. You guys don't pay attention to ads. Neither do I. But, you know, and that is, there's a problem with the ad agencies because they know the digital ads do not have the impact. They keep pouring money into it, even though they don't know it's not as effective because it's cheaper to advertise digital. They can say, oh, we reached 10 million people. Okay, but how many of those 10 million actually remember your ad? The purpose of an ad, the purpose of an ad is to make you guys want to see it and then say, oh, that's nice. Maybe I'll buy that car in a few years, or maybe I'll run down to that, you know, nightclub or whatever. But if you don't digest it and it doesn't make an impression on your conscious mind, it's an ineffective ad. And I think that's one of the problems with digital advertising. They don't realize the disconnect. Young people really good at screening it out. You guys know how to do it better than we do. And it's a challenge for ad agencies and subsequently media in general because they have to figure out how to make money on the new paradigm.
You started with the Daily News before you went to the Post. A couple of questions. It's like, did you make a conscious decision to get into media reporting? And then did you make a conscious decision to start going after the CEOs and the money men and the publishers, or did you kind of fall there?
Yeah, you just follow what's going on. A conscious decision to get into media. I guess I was working for my boring electrical B2B publications at McGraw-Hill back in the day when General Electric called a big press conference to announce that they were buying NBC. So they were a smokestack industry in America, you know, locomotives and light bulbs and refrigerators, you know, old line industrial company now buying what at the time was a transformational acquisition of NBC. And, you know, now subsequently, GE found that that wasn't the best deal. They shed a lot of their old businesses and eventually they did sell off NBC to somebody else, but they made a lot of money on it and whatnot. So I figured, well, gee, if GE is doing that, I should probably follow suit. Media seemed like a very exciting field to cover. And briefly worked for a newsletter that covered PR, and found a publication up in Boston that was looking for a new managing editor. So I applied for the job. I didn't really want to move up they were actually outside of Boston, so I was up there for a little while working there and convinced them so it's kind of happenstance. I convinced them to be covering the magazine business. You really got to be in the center of a magazine. So they sent me to New York as their New York bureau chief. And then I hired staff in New York and whatnot. But a lot of it was just a little bit of a perception that it was exciting time to cover media and the luck of the draw, opportunistic. Yeah. Question.
Throughout your career while like exposing like some of these CEOs, you ever like felt like what would the litigations be like for like the people like a lot under like the workers at like some of these companies that like you have like exposed like the CEO and like what would be like
oh yeah, the workers were
like in terms of like would workers be fired or something like that?
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah. The workers were always a great source of information. One of the advantages of covering a beat, you know, closely is after a while people started to know that that I was a kind of a go-to guy on their beat. So if stuff was getting screwed up. I remember one executive said, you know, they were having some big meetings about how to diversify and outsource and stuff and sell some properties. And then I would get scoops, and he said, yeah, it was almost like he knew somebody who was in the meeting. And I'm like, yeah, it was almost like that, wasn't it? I did know somebody in the meeting. And they were, so they would write, you know, I would write stuff based on what I knew was really coming down, and it would get this thing was going to mean like, you know, 200 jobs are going to be outsourced to Bangalore, and the union was up in arms, and so the impact on the people was always number one point of concern.
Thank
to
you.
me.
Thank you. Answer my question.
But you as a journalist have to, you get used to your environment. You start to be able to like predict, and like I remember reading in the Times article how you covered Condé Nast and inside Newhouse, and you started to just, I mean, you're in a business for long enough, you start seeing patterns, and I thought it was interesting how I Newhouse would come back from the holidays, and you knew it's like the periodicity of like he would come back and he liked to fire people. He liked to fire people.
Yeah, he would. He was kind of an odd duck in a lot of ways. He would always have a big Condé Nast Christmas party in very early December, and there was always like, oh, who's sitting where in relation to Cy Newhouse. So one year, they were always having it at the Four Seasons. They sent me the seating chart. So we did, hey, who's in and who's out. If you were sitting way far away from Cy Newhouse at this dinner, you were considered to be in Siberia and probably on the way out. I don't know if it was really that rock solid a pecking order, but you know, the big rivalry. Oh, the editor of Vanity, who is his favorite? Is it Tina Brown, the editor of Vanity Fair, or Anna Wintour, the editor of Vogue? And where were they sitting in relation to Cy? More fun than anything else. It entertained the chattering class. I regard it as kind of a frivolous thing. I remember one year I didn't write the story. I started writing it every year. And one year my son was born on December 3rd, so I was out for like a week, and I get back and there's all these emails. Hey, how come you didn't cover the thing about this year? And I'm like, all right, I guess I'm not going to get out of it. I got to cover it, even though it's a week late. Still covered it. It was more like a fun kind of thing. Same thing with the Time 100 party of the 100 famous Americans. We started doing, well, who's sitting in the first tier and the second tier and the third tier. I remember before Ronan Farrow won the Pulitzer Prize for his expose on Harvey Weinstein and the whole sex scandal, I was sitting at a table in what I considered Siberia, the third level. I had Mia Farrow, Ronan Farrow, myself, and a couple of other people at the table. We were all way up there. Siberia. Then he wins the Pulitzer Prize, and you know. But I was happy just to be in the establishment. I was not one of the top 100, but they realized if they didn't let me in, I'd make more trouble for them by being on the outside. So that's the advantage of being a beat reporter.
Well, that's certainly, I mean, something to be. you're a badass. What was it like working for Rupert Murdoch?
You know, he was. When I first got to the paper, a guy named Michael Wolff, who's kind of caught on to fame as a Trump chronicler. He wrote the best-selling Fire and Fury book, one of the first exposés on the chaos in the Trump White House in the first year. At the time, he was at the media columnist in New York Magazine, and his theory was that Rupert hired me because he knew I was breaking media scoops for Ad Age and the Daily News before I got to the Post, and he wanted the Post to be media central for a lot of the news because he figured if he covered the media, then the media would cover him. And his So he felt he was pretty hands off with me and the business section in general, because he wanted to his Michael Wolff theory was he wanted to drag readers through the paper, exposing them to the right slanted opinion pages and news pages before they got to the business section. Um, so he never really bothered me. I didn't. It's media, so I didn't have a political point of view. Other people are paid to have a political point of view. Miranda Devine, Michael Goodwin, they're opinion columnists. We run Richard Lowry as a syndicated columnist. So clearly those are, right of center people but to me, business for the most part was neutral. He never called me up and said, you got to cover this. I'd run into him in the elevator and I'd try to pump him for information, but I never called him up either for stuff unless, I'd call his PR guy was directly something that I had to cover. But so to me, he kept the Post alive through a lot of bad times. So as bad as he might be in terms of Fox, he kept the New York Post alive. Now it's making a little bit of money finally after yeah, he's owned it pretty much since about 1977. Took a few years off, but nobody
Everything's
else.
a matter of perspective. It's like the guy's putting food on your table and he continues to do it, then it's like, it's
And
like
if he was looking for somebody to share his right-wing political views, they never would have hired me. I always said I was, I'm an Irish Catholic Democrat. It wasn't hard to find my voting record. So that clearly that was not on his agenda when he hired me. He just wanted the Post to be ground zero for good media coverage, and I benefited from his desire to have that. And he never bothered me politically. In the newsroom, I would think well over 80% of the people are left of center, but we used to have a lot of good spirited arguments. But people do know that when they're writing, which way the powers that be lean. So I think it flavors it maybe subtly, and some of the opinion writers very blatantly, but not the newsroom in general. We could write, tabloidism would usually trump politics at the Post, not so at the
right. Yeah, right. The more eyeballs, it's like, I want to open the floor up for the students to ask questions, but I don't want to, I definitely want to talk about the Tarosian thing since, that's, what
Yeah.
we're going to talk about. That's what we're going to talk about. It's like, who broke it? It's like, people forget that a good journalist has to be detective.
I was working on that story on and off for a couple of years, in between doing my Media Inc. column. The Post business editors never really got the handle around it, in part because the story got too complicated. People would tell me bad stuff that was happening, and then as I would research it, it would turn out to be worse. Like, oh, what about the shakedown of Rabbi Pinto? I'm like, yeah, that's bad. What about he used to hate it. If somebody left the company, he would give them scathing reviews, and if somebody called up for a reference, he would sandbag the person. One woman said she was so afraid of him that she lived by herself upstate. She got a German Shepherd guard dog because she feared what he would do. When he resigned, he said he wished cancer on her kids. He's a bad guy, He was a bad apple in a lot of ways.
Right.
The stories we
Maybe
got
not
about
Jeffrey
him.
Not Jeffrey Epstein, but maybe like just one state of separation removed from Epstein. Because it's like he was a
the idea of, for whatever reason, he was a PR guy for Pornhub and a couple of other Girls Gone Wild, Joe Francis, before Joe Francis went to prison. He was a PR guy for some pay-per-view, the search for America's next top porn star, as if there is it's just any kind of unsavory character. Like one of Tiger Woods' mistresses hired him as a PR person. And since he
Right.
was in touch with all these controversial figures, he would plan items in
Right, undo
publications.
itself.
Yeah, it's a whole gimmick. His problem was he would cross over into, really deceptive, if not illegal practices. He wasn't just representing somebody with an unsavory past and getting occasional good publicity for him. He was manipulative and he was doing bad stuff, all the time as a normal course of business.
And arguably, the worst stuff would have been the whole idea of disseminating
What he did was,
propaganda news.
well, he bought a PR news site. It wasn't widely known as a go-to source for news. It was run by a husband and wife team in Europe. They were both in the PR industry, but they were open about it, that they were in the industry and they were writing about it as well. The wife owned it and the husband was the editor-in-chief. I eventually found them. They were in Germany at the time when they sold it to him. They were both kind of pro-Russian PR people, and that's how they bonded with Tarosian. They thought he was their big buddy. As soon as they sold it to him, he took all their names off of every articles they had written and replaced them with fake journalist names like Jason.
Yeah, phony bylines. It didn't exist.
Phony bylines, fake journalists. Tarosian constantly deposited stories about himself as crisis manager guru, one of the biggest PR firms in the country, well known, some of this stuff was so laughably simplistic and boosterism that you wonder how it could have fooled anybody, but it did. Some people suspected it, but the editor's like, you can't have suspicion that he sold it to him. You got to have, and other people just, geez, I got slammed by this PR news outlet, and I don't know why. They're saying I have high turnover and bad client relations, and none of that's true. And they never called me for comment, but they just thought it was like a low brand of journalism and a hit piece, but they didn't know Tarosian was behind it, a guy that may have just lost out on business to their firm, and that he was being slammed that they were being slammed by the competition, disguising itself as a legitimate news source. So once we finally documented that, the reaction was explosive. The New York chapter of the Public Relations Society said he was a stain on the profession, gave him a blistering condemnation. A Hispanic journalist, Hispanic Public Relations Society condemned him. Richard Edelman, who runs one of the biggest public relations firms in the country, if not the biggest, he slammed him. They all credited Cranes, which didn't technically break the story, but we documented the extent of the cover-up. And I think it was a case, once again, of the cover-up was deemed worse than the actual crime. Buying the site and not telling anybody, yeah, that's pretty serious. But the extent that he went to cover it up, once that information started leaking out between the Daily Beast, the New York Times, and the New York Post, who covered him in mid-December, it was the efforts that he took to brush aside all that stuff. He then replaced all the fake byline names by everything PR staff, totally anonymous. I think the only bylines left on the site were byline stories by Ron Tarosian on crisis management.
It's like it's almost like he went back to the scene of the crime, and it just kept on providing more evidence.
Exactly. Good analogy. Back to the scene of the crime. Yeah, and he was brushing off the fingerprints, trying to take his fingerprints off. Then the funny thing is, once I said, hey, I wasn't just going to run the Public Relations Society of America's blistering condemnation. I said, hey, Ron, the PRSA issued this thing. So then he tries something new and different. He tries telling the truth. Yes, I did buy the site in 2014. It was a momentary lapse. I'm like, you can't have a momentary lapse that lasts 8 years. And then he admits that he did unethical things in his early days. Like, here's one of the unethical things. He gets sweet. He always had like dozens of very young women in very high-ranking, high-paying positions. Senior vice president of beauty. He just loved having a whole room full of people working for him at a high price. I think he claimed he had 275 people, so he's good-sized PR for him. So he convinces he has an account for a plastic surgeon. So then he convinces 3 women to go on Good Morning America to talk about Botox that he claims that they had when they were teenagers. Now, they didn't have Botox when they were teenagers. They were just pretending that they did. And you can't do that. He represented a public, a plastic surgeon who was speaking out about it. So, oh yeah, I get the plastic surgeon to speak out about it. But it was a total fake incident. These girls did not have Botox, speaking as if they did.
But right, but then again, it's like I think about these incidents, and it's like I don't know if you ever watched Century of the South by Adam Curtis. The granddaddy of public relations, Edward Bernays, right? Edward Bernays kind of got us, who's considered arguably the guy that coined the term public relations. I mean, he was staging things all. I mean, what's qualitatively different in the public relations game nowadays from,
Well, I mean, social media.
Is it more full on? It's like.
Oh, social media is revolutionary public relations. To some extent, you're a celebrity. The old celebrity tabloids and People Magazine and Us Weekly have been waylaid by Instagram and TikTok and whatnot because you don't really need outlets to get your word out. You just put it out yourself. So your PR person consults with the star, and they issue something. Britney Spears or whoever, they put out the videos themselves. So to some extent, it's made that whole celebrity reporting field a little bit tougher to navigate if you're a media company. I guess the stars think it's great because they don't have to filter through the media anymore.
Right. Okay, we got 15 minutes left, so I want to give everybody ample opportunity to speak. They're the most important people in the room. Questions. I know that Evan. Okay, let's go. Okay, 7.
First, all right.
Make sure that he can hear. Speak up. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry, I had to.
You're lovely. All right.
So I was
A lot
wondering,
of live wires in here. All right.
how do you like to consume media the most? Like, as an editor or an ex-editor, do you read the newspaper or do you like to read news online or and also my second.
Now it's online. I still subscribe to the New York Times and the New York Post. Get delivered to my apartment every day. But it's funny, now you'll read it and you're like, I read a lot of this stuff already yesterday online when it happened. There's more online. News. I still like the layout of print. I like to see sometimes a print version of a story will have more of a second day analysis. Somebody once said to me, daily papers are now what weeklies used to do. They digest and analyze things. The weeklies, like Time and Newsweek and US, have turned into what monthlies used to do, like long-range features. And the monthlies are kind of hurting. But I would digest and receive most of my news online. Google alerts for any company that I'm interested in or personality that I'm interested in following.
Any go-to sites? Any sites every day?
The number one news vehicle right now is your phone.
Right.
And it is for me as well. For better or worse, that's the reality. Speed is of the essence.
Right. Next question. Does that answer it for you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Ben.
So I'm working on something that's a little bit provocative to some types of groups who get angry at questioning their ideals. And because you're a little bit more of a top blower case where people can get mad because you're revealing things that they don't really think about, you can often probably get threatened or people getting angry? Like, how do you dodge that, and how to gain a reputation of solidarity?
I don't know. Being in journalism business, you kind of get used to people yelling at you. It's just like, okay. You know, I remember one time somebody lied to me that she was going to be leaving her job as editorial director, and she was getting paid 1.5 million a year, and and then she said, oh, I said, yeah, I've heard she left. Well, her mother died in Canada, so she's unavailable. She can't speak. And then about a week goes by, and then she announces it to the New York Times, to my rival in the New York Times, that she's leaving American media, and then Us Weekly and whatever. Not Us Weekly at the time. National Enquirer, Star Magazine. That she's leaving, and that basically my tip was correct. But I wasn't reporting. It was now being reported a week later in the New York Times. So I write this scathing report, like Bonnie Fuller lied. She went on. Da, 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 da. So I get this scathing letter from her husband. How dare you make my wife's mother's death fodder for your tabloid journalism column? May you rot in hell. So I was kind of, I'm like, so we just put it on our wall of fame, like printed it out and hung it up. And I said, well, you know what we should do? We should get our circulation department to write him a thank you. Dear Mr. Fuller, thank you for your note. Due to the volume of mail we received, we cannot respond to everything, but we just hung it up on the wall, and it stayed there until we changed offices as a classic. Yeah. So,
But you didn't have any controversy.
I say, look, you don't want bad coverage. Don't lie to me. I'm on this beat for a long time. If you lie, it's going to get exposed.
Right.
And don't give gift wrap scoops to the New York Times. If I call you first with a story, you're obligated to answer. I don't care who you are. You could be a student journalist. You could be me. You could be the Wall Street Journal. You got to give a forthright, honest answer. Don't bullshit me and tell me it's not true, and then give the story to somebody else. I'll murder you. Figuratively, not literally.
Right, but you build a relationship with people. I mean, like anything else. I mean, I spent some time. They tell you to embargo something. It's like you're not gonna. You build a relationship of trust.
Oh yeah, well they know that if a rumor is bullshit, I'm not gonna run it. I'm not gonna say, oh, here's a rumor and the company denies it, because that creates a whole avalanche of what is it really true or not? I'm like, I will report on it when I believe it's true or when I can confirm it. I'm not gonna just run with it. The same thing when somebody says, I'm so mad. I think I'm gonna sue the guy. Well, are you gonna sue the guy? If you're gonna sue the guy, give me a copy of the lawsuit, and then I'll write a story about your lawsuit.
Right. It's like
saying you think you're gonna sue,
right.
and then your adversary gets slammed with bad publicity, but then you don't sue because all you want to do is create some bad publicity for them. I'm like, no, you want to sue? You got to sue. Give me the suit. I'll be happy to run it first.
You're just being a tool for them. Next question.
Reputation and integrity matter. So what happens to Ron Tarosian from here? Is he done? Is he sputtering?
The thing is, Tarosian, I mean, I'm working on a couple of really, bigger stories that if and when they come out, will make it more difficult. But he resigned as CEO of the company he founded and ran for I don't know how many years, 27 years. He's still the chairman. He's still the owner. So how separated is he really going to be? We don't know. He may not be involved in day-to-day decision making, but he's certainly going to be reaping profit. And I don't think the outcry against him is going to simmer down. you know, speaking of people who are planning on lawsuits, I know some people have been contacted the Federal Trade Commission because you're not allowed to falsely disguise what you do. The public has to be able to understand that you are paying for something and it's commercial and sponsored content. So they may act. A couple of the guys who've been slammed by them are saying we're going to try and file a RICO racketeering lawsuit against them. I'm like, okay, you do, okay, you're running the story first, but I'm not running the story. So his problems could only just be beginning. And I don't know what he's going to do. There's also, he's had a lot of ties to Russian and Ukrainian money. That's a whole nother problem he's going to have.
Jeez.
We haven't even gone into that one because it's too.
I mean, if it doesn't stop you from getting into if it doesn't stop you from getting in the presidency. Next question.
Yeah, there's going to be like more than a few other stories on Jersey. I doubt he's going to like them, but he's not trying to eliminate ideas. He's trying to report. I think he knows secretly that I got a lot more dirt on him that hasn't come out yet. So I was joking to one of my editors. I said, I've gotten so many like stories out of this. Maybe I should send them a nice gift. It's a great source.
You got one back here.
It is cruel. Next question, Doran.
You mentioned digital advertising and how young people typically don't respond to ads very well. What do you think? I'm a musician, and I'm going to need to do a lot of advertising in my career for myself. What do you think is the best platform to reach young people, like in the current age and in the future?
Don't know. I mean,
Doran.
I don't know. You guys know
fellow
better
man.
than I. My son Eamon gets like everything from TikTok. Not on TikTok. He doesn't see it. The news sometimes ends up on TikTok. Only videos end up on TikTok. So that seems to be the flavor of the month or the year. You could go, legitimate legacy news operations and try to get them to cover you. And then maybe post that on Twitter and whatnot. But you guys would know what you guys are listening to better than I do. I'm still catching up on a lot of that stuff. I use it. I know it gets followers, but I'm far from a master of search engine optimization. But
Yeah, like this generation. Does that answer your question, Doran? He's a fellow Manhattanite, by the way, Doran.
TikTok.
TikTok's the thing. Okay, another question. I want to make sure that if you have a question you really want to ask, that you get to ask it. Who else? This is participation, part of your participation. Great. Come on, we got 5 minutes left.
Am I good, Ms. Bridger, for my question?
Yeah. Anyone have a burning desire? No. Hannah, good.
What
Sure, for the ladies.
skills do you think are essential or like you need to like work on in order to become like a good like editor and like reporter? Like I know like you like have like a really like large history with all this stuff. Like what skills do you think are essential to like become successful?
You might find it surprising since I've done so much talking here, but the best skill is to be a good listener and have curiosity. And try to weed out, I feel, opinions out of reporting. And maybe I'm old school on that. I don't really like the polarized, opinionated news cycle. I like objective and the reporter getting out of the story. Like when somebody reads a story that's like an expose, I don't want them to think, oh, Keith Kelly wrote this story. I want them to think, holy shit, look at this. And then maybe wonder, I wonder who wrote this story. I don't want, in my version of it, to be in the story. I want the reader to be sort of amazed by the facts. So you got to be a good writer, got to be curious, got to be objective, and listen. Different mediums have different ways of doing it. If you're working for Atlantic Monthly, you got to be able to write a 5,000-word feature story. If you're doing, I don't know, maybe something for the Daily Beast or BuzzFeed, the quick hit news stuff may be better. But still good writing, good listening, and objective. I think that'd be my criteria. I'd hire, if you got those skills, I'd hire you.
Good to know.
Scott, got one follow-up for you on something Nick had asked you. I think he was looking for what publications, even though you're going to them on your phone, what are your go-to publications every day, and how many are there?
Or are there?
How many are there? Well, I think, the Washington Post was more go-to pre-election. I haven't read them as often, Washington Post and Politico. I still read nypost.com, and New York Times does a lot of breaking stuff. I still keep in touch with the media world through Advertising Age and Adweek. The former editor of Vanity Fair started a once a week thing called Airmail, which I've enjoyed. I actually subscribe to it. I think the Daily Beast has done some really good reporting, so I actually subscribe to that. Subscribe to Washington Post, New York Times. The Hill, I don't subscribe to The Hill. I think I get them for free most of the time. They cover the inside the Beltway stuff. So probably a good half dozen things I would consult regularly and daily. And then other stuff just as it pops, you follow it. Wall Street Journal, they be in the mix as well.
Right.
Did you say it was Tina Brown? Nick was asking if it was Tina Brown who does Airmail.
No, it's Graydon Carter. Graydon Carter started Airmail. He moved to France and then he came back, after he left Vanity Fair. Tina Brown is in she's in the kind of the conference business. I guess she has like an extensive list of contacts, and she's doing, forums. I probably has been somewhat constricted by the COVID stuff. I don't know if she made the transition to Zoom conference, but that was her whole thing. Leading women in the world and global forums and things of that nature.
Okay.
The beauty of it is, from a business point of view, anybody that wants to go and listen to the stars that you can get on Adidas, they pay up front. So it's a different business model. Advertising, publication, you run it, and in 30 or 60 or 90 days, the advertising will pay. So you have to have a bigger money. An exhibit and events business, they either pay or they don't pay.
Right. And that's a good place we're at 1:15. Anybody else have one more pressing question before we wrap it? People, okay, Keith, as usual, it's like great to have you as a source. It's like, hopefully we'll speak again soon. I appreciate it.
If you have any questions you didn't get to ask, you can always email me at keithj01@gmail. It's my name, no dot, 01. Make sure you put the 01 in there, because there's another Keith Kelly on Gmail. He's gotten a lot of freelance writing assignment offers. So far, he hasn't taken them. He's not in journalism.
Right.
So,
isn't there a Keith that's a Thai soccer? I was like, it's like a Thai soccer player or something. I can't remember.
I don't know where he is. But a couple of editors have said, yeah, I sent you an email about the ones that do a story, column, whatever. So I never got it. So they sent it. They sent it to Keith J. Kelly without the 01. And I'm like, did he take the job? Did he take the job?
Okay. Okay. Keith, have a good day. Have a nice weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks
Thank you for
guys.
coming.
Enjoyed it.
An applause.
All the best.
Okay, Keith, we'll talk to you soon. People with essays.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.